The night I ran for my life started with my baby niece in my arms and a man at the door. I was hiding in the upstairs nursery of the Crimson Lounge. My back was pressed to the wall. Heavy footsteps thumped on the floor below. They weren't the usual staff. I knew what those men had just done downstairs. I'd seen the blood on the floor from a crack in the office door. I could still smell the gunpowder. Then a voice shouted, sharp and clear, "Check the upstairs rooms now." The stairs started to creak under their weight. My eyes landed on the only way out, the open window. The cold night air was pouring in. I saw the black iron of the fire escape outside. It was our only chance. I moved fast, swinging one leg over the icy windowsill. My niece, Chloe, started to cry, a scared, thin sound. I froze. I looked down at the dark alley 3 stories below. Then I looked back at the bedroom door. The handle began to turn. A man I didn't recognize stepped into the room. He saw me immediately. His eyes went wide, then hard. He opened his mouth to yell for the others. The cold rain still clung to my skin like I couldn't peel it off. I stood dripping on the deep burgundy rug in Marco Rossi's office. My niece slept against my chest, a small, warm weight. Marco leaned against his heavy wooden desk. He just watched me. The silence was thick. I pulled the empty formula bottle from my pocket. My hands shook. I placed it on the edge of the desk between us. "She needs this," I said. My voice sounded thin. "The store is closed. I have nothing else." He didn't move. He just looked from the bottle to my face. I knew what I was to him, a liability standing on his rug. "Please," I said. That one word was all I had. It wasn't a deal. It wasn't a threat. It was just the truth. A tear escaped then, cutting a clean line through the dirt on my cheek. He saw it. His eyes, which had been so flat, flickered. He looked away. He reached for the bottle slowly. His fingers closed around the plastic. "My sister," he said, his voice low. He stopped. He hadn't meant to say it. I saw his jaw tighten. "She used to get that brand." He said it like it was a curse. Then he was quiet again, holding that little bottle like it was something heavy. He pushed off from the desk and moved to walk past me toward the door. He stopped very close to my side. I held my breath. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his soap under the cigar smoke. He didn't look at me. He just stood there for a long moment, so near I could feel the heat from his body. My own skin went tight and aware. He didn't touch me. He didn't say anything more. Then he walked to the door and opened it, his back to me. He didn't look back. That question, why he'd stopped so close without touching me, sat there like something unfinished. Later, his car idled outside an all-night store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He'd driven us to a place his family controlled. He said it would be safe. His routine calm almost convinced me. Then I saw the car. A dark sedan was idling across the street, a thin line of exhaust rising into the cold air. Marco saw it too. His whole body went still. A different kind of stillness. He slowed our car. His hand moved to the inside of his jacket. I knew what was under there. "Is this about me?" I whispered. I shrank down in my seat, pulling my niece's blanket higher over her head. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the sedan. He looked at the store. He looked at me. His eyes held mine. I saw the conflict there, plain as day. It was a war between his plan and something else. He looked away first, back to the road. His hands tightened on the wheel. He made a sharp U-turn. The tires squealed. He drove faster, checking the mirror. "It is now," he said, his voice low and flat. The sedan's headlights flicked on behind us. They began to follow. Why he'd looked at me before he looked away. I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the answer. The adrenaline was still buzzing in my teeth. I fumbled my key at the apartment door, my shoulder pressed against the cold wood. Marco Rossi stood behind me. He didn't help. 2 of his men waited on the landing. The one with the shaved head was Vinny, his driver. The other guy was new to me. Marco gave a small nod, and they just moved past me into my home. They didn't ask. One went to the kitchen. The other started in the living room. I heard a drawer slide open in my desk. I clenched my fists. I stepped into the room. The new guy, a younger one with a tattoo curling up his neck, was looking through my papers. I put my body between him and my desk. "Stop it," I said. The words came out thin. Marco held out a small, white slip of paper. "This is the formula," he said flatly. "You will make it." I stared at the paper. The logo of the all-night store was printed at the top. I didn't take it. The smell of the stranger's cheap cologne mixed with the familiar scent of my own carpet. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. "You can't just move into my life," I snapped. My voice shook. I backed against the wall. The younger man stopped and looked at Marco. "Get them out. You gave me the formula. We're done." Marco leaned in. His voice was low. The alternative is Thorn, he doesn't ask nicely. He placed the formula slip on my coffee table. The edge of the paper curled up. He straightened and looked at me. For a second, his eyes dropped to my hands. They were still fists. Then he looked back at my face. His own hands were relaxed at his sides. It was a choice, that relaxation. He left the paper there, a white flag on my stained wood. Real quick, if you're here to find out what happens when a mafia boss decides you're under his protection, hit subscribe. Trust me, the part where he makes it public is next. The pressure of Marco's fingers on my arm lingered like a cold brand. I found myself leaning against my kitchen counter. Marco stood framed in the doorway. His men had just left. The silence they left behind was worse. I pushed off the counter and walked to the small shelf by the fridge. I grabbed the framed photo of me and Chloe laughing at the county fair. I held the cold glass tight against my chest. He watched me from the doorway. He didn't move into the room. Sentiment is a weakness, Marco stated. His voice was flat like a doctor's diagnosis. He was looking for a lie or a crack he could use. This is my sister, I said. My voice was thick. My eyes burned, but I kept them open. I let the tear track down my cheek. I didn't wipe it away. Marco's attention fixed on the picture in my hands. His shoulders dropped a fraction. It was a small movement. Then he looked away at the blank wall. He was quiet for a long time. He finally spoke again. His voice was lower now. "Put it away," he said. "Hide it." He didn't look at me. He turned his head toward the living room. I saw his throat move as he swallowed. He had looked at me. He had seen the photo and seen my tear. He had seen the reason and it had reached him. He turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. I stood there holding the picture. The unopened formula sat on my coffee table. I understood his order wasn't a threat. It was a shield. Stepping onto the rain-slicked sidewalk, I flinched as a stray cat darted from the shadows. I saw the car first. It was the same dark sedan from before. A man leaned against it, a Thorn soldier I didn't recognize. Marco stood between us on the wet pavement. He didn't look back at me. He pulled a cigarette from a silver case. His hands were steady as he lit it. The small flame lit the sharp angle of his cheekbone for a second. I saw the Thorn man straighten up. He watched Marco with a flat, careful look. "Tell Thorn she's under Rossi protection now," Marco said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the night air. He wasn't talking to me. He was talking to the street, to the windows, to the man by the car. He took a long drag. The tip glowed bright orange in the dark. He blew the smoke out in a slow, straight line. The action was so calm it felt like a threat all by itself. I understood what he was doing. This was a declaration. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for everyone. This was a public claim. It meant war if Thorn challenged it. I heard a soft scuff of a shoe behind me. One of Marco's own men, a guy named Leo, shifted his weight. He was nervous. Marco dropped his cigarette onto the wet sidewalk. He crushed it under the sole of his polished shoe. He twisted his foot once, grinding it down. He did not look away from the Thorn soldier. My own breath felt too loud in my ears. Love didn't change what he was. It only made leaving harder. I stayed because my sister's face was on a phone out here somewhere. I stayed because he was the only wall between that phone and my door. The Thorn man stared at Marco for a long time. Then he gave a single, sharp nod. He pushed off the car and got inside without a word. The sedan pulled away from the curb. Its red taillights blurred in the misty rain. Marco watched it until it turned the corner. Then his shoulders lost some of their rigid set. He turned to face me. He ran a hand over his mouth. His eyes were tired. He looked at me for a second too long. I didn't know what it meant. He had done exactly what I had whispered under my breath when I thought he couldn't hear. He had made me safe. Now he had to live with what that cost. But what he had to live with after making me safe? I still had no answer for that. My throat still held that tight, dry ache from the sidewalk. In the safe house's living room, the only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I stared at the sealed can of formula on the coffee table. Marco stood by the window, his back to me. I was tired of being a package. He moved from one place to another. I needed to know why. "Thorn wants me dead for seeing a murder," I said. My voice sounded flat. "That's the only reason, right?" Marco didn't turn. His silence was its own answer. The sofa cushion felt stiff under my hands. "I need the truth, Marco. I am done with being scared of things I don't understand." He turned then. The kitchen light caught the tired lines around his mouth. "Some truths don't make you safer. They make you a bigger target." He walked over and sat on the far end of the sofa. He kept a careful distance. He looked at his own hands. The man who was killed was one of Thorn's own captains. He was skimming from a protection racket. I processed that. So it was a punishment, an internal matter. I still don't see why my seeing it is a death sentence. Marco let out a short breath. It wasn't a laugh. Because the man who pulled the trigger was Thorne's nephew, it was supposed to look like a rival hit, clean, professional. He finally looked at me. You saw his face. You saw it was personal. That kind of family-on-family violence breaks the old codes. It brings police heat on everyone. It makes Thorne look weak. The pieces clicked into place with a cold finality. I understood. My hand went to my own throat. So I'm a loose end that proves his weakness. And the formula? I gestured to the can. You brought it because you knew from the start Thorne wouldn't stop. You weren't just buying me a few days. You were taking sides. Marco didn't deny it. A single muscle in his neck tightened. I took a side the moment I answered your door. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. The action made him seem younger. The formula was a promise that your niece would eat, that you wouldn't have to go back out there while I figured out how to fix this. My knuckles ached from my own clenched fists. I pushed through the kitchen door. The sharp scent of lemons hit me from a half-peeled rind on the counter. Marco stood across the small room. He had his back to me, looking out the window. I leaned against the doorframe and waited. He spoke without turning around. You think I did this on a whim, that I just picked a fight with Sela's Thorne for fun? I think you're telling me half-truths, I said. My voice sounded tired. You said he broke the codes. You didn't say what that meant for you. Marco turned then. The kitchen's single bulb cast a hard light. For the first time, I noticed a faint, silvery line across the bridge of his nose. He didn't move toward me. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket. He slid a small, faded photograph from its sleeve and placed it on the counter between us. I didn't touch it. From where I stood, I saw a little girl with dark braids, grinning at the camera. Who is she? My sister. Gabriella. He left the photo there. She was 8 when she got sick. My father was at war with another family. The hospital was in contested territory. He looked at the picture, not at me. The old code said you didn't touch hospitals. You didn't involve civilians. The other side respected it. They let our people through. She lived because of that. I understood then. The murder I saw wasn't just a crime. It was a signal. Thorne was burning the rules down. And you called him out on it. I made it my business. Marco finally looked at me. His eyes were dark and utterly exhausted. I told my father Thorne was a rabid dog. I said he'd bring the police down on all of us. My father said I was sentimental. That business was business. He let out a short breath. So I acted on my own. I declared you under my protection. To him, that's a challenge. To the old men, it's a betrayal. I'm on thin ice with my own family now. The confession hung in the lemon-scented air. He had broken his own world's rules to make a point, to make me safe. He was alone. I took a step forward. Our shoulders were almost touching as we both looked down at the smiling girl in the photo. I could feel the warmth from his arm. I didn't move away. He didn't either. We just stood there in the quiet kitchen with the weight of everything we couldn't say pressed between us. He showed me the picture of his sister. And the rest of it, his family's war, Thorne breaking the rules. It all clicked into place. But why he hadn't moved away when I stepped closer? That part didn't. The taste of the salted pretzel he'd given me was still on my tongue. We were outside the safe house door now. The dawn air was cold and thin. It smelled like wet asphalt. I stood on the top step, pulling my coat tight. Marco was a few feet away on the sidewalk. He was looking down the block. His profile was sharp against the pale gray sky. He'd been quiet since the kitchen. The silence was heavy with everything we hadn't said. Your car is coming, he told me. His voice was low, flat. Before I could answer, an engine roared. A black van shot around the corner 2 blocks down. It accelerated straight for us. Marco moved before I understood. He shoved me hard back against the front door. My shoulder hit the wood. The van screeched to a stop at the curb. The side door slid open. 2 men in dark jackets jumped out. They came at us fast. Marco stepped off the curb to meet them. He didn't pull a weapon. The first man swung a baton. Marco caught his arm and twisted. I heard a sick crack. The man screamed and fell. The second man lunged at me. Marco pivoted and kicked him in the chest. The man stumbled back into the open van door. Marco closed the distance. He grabbed the man's head and slammed it against the van frame. The man went limp. The driver gunned the engine. The van lurched forward, dragging the open door. Marco jumped back. The door clipped his side. He grunted and staggered. He caught himself on a lamppost. The van sped away, leaving one man unconscious on the street. Marco straightened up. He pressed a hand to his ribs. His white shirt was already stained with blood from a cut on his forehead. He looked at me. His breathing was harsh. "Get to the car, now." He pointed down the street. His sedan was turning the corner. I didn't move. I looked at the blood on his face. I looked at the man on the ground. Marco had put himself between them and me. He'd done it without hesitation. He'd done it with his hands. The violence was real. It was ugly. But it was for me. That was the thing I couldn't fit inside my head. The car pulled up. The driver, a guy named Carlo, got out. He looked at the scene, then at Marco. "Boss." Marco ignored him. He was still looking at me. He didn't look away. For a second, he looked much younger than he was. It was the look of a boy waiting to see if you would run from him. I pushed that thought aside. Why I hadn't moved when he told me to run? That would come back to me later. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. A fine tremor had settled deep in my bones after the gunfire. The blue light from my laptop bled across the kitchen table. Chloe was asleep on the couch finally, the formula long gone. I had chosen trust that night. I got in Marco's car. Now I was in my own kitchen, trying to earn that trust back by being useful. I pulled up another corporate registry. The names were all nonsense. Aurelius Holdings, Vanguard Agricultural. I rubbed my eyes. Someone in his world was always watching. I had to find a crack in Thorne's armor first. I cross-referenced the registered agents. Different lawyers, different firms. I checked the addresses next. A pattern began to emerge. I leaned closer to the screen. 3 separate companies, all linked to Thorne, listed the same warehouse address. A bland string of numbers in the industrial district. I wrote it down on a scrap of paper. My handwriting was jagged from the tremor in my hand. The shipping manifests were harder to find. I dug through old Port Authority bulletins. Customs logs. Chloe shifted on the couch behind me, mumbling in her sleep. I kept clicking. The companies were importing specialized agricultural supplies from Eastern Europe. The descriptions were vague. The frequency was not. Shipments arrived every 5 weeks like clockwork. I pulled up a map. I plotted the warehouse address. A single, large building near the rail yard. A place that could swallow a lot of crates. A place that belonged to Silas Thorne. I sat back in my chair. The chill from the window seeped through my sweater. This was a thread, a real one. I hadn't run. I hadn't just hidden. I had found something. For a second, I thought of Marco's face in the safe house kitchen when he showed me the faded photo. He hadn't moved away when I stepped closer because he was letting me see it, letting me see him. The man who knew what it was to have something to lose. Now I had something to give him. It was a small thing, but it was mine. It was a start. The ghost of that coffee-fueled focus still hummed in my temples. My boots hit the slick, rain-slicked planks of the Rossi Dock warehouse. The air was thick with the smell of damp rot and diesel. Marco stood ahead of me with 2 of his men. They were black cutouts against the harsh work lights. A single shipping container sat isolated on the wet concrete. Marco said it was a Thorne shipment his men had flagged. He expected guns or drugs. I stood back, my arms wrapped tight around myself against the chill. I watched his shoulders. They were set with a rigid tension I knew meant business. This was why I hadn't moved when he told me to run. I needed to see what he would do with power. I needed to know if the man who kept a child's photo was still in there. The screech of that crowbar was still ringing in my ears. Luca, one of Marco's guys, forced the container door open. The sound was awful. It was like tearing metal. This wave of stale, sour air rolled out. It smelled like sweat and fear. Then I saw shadows move inside. They pulled back from the light, and I heard it, a soft whimper, a human sound. Marco went completely still. He took one slow step forward and put his hand up to stop Luca. I could see his profile. The muscle in his jaw twitched once, then froze. He moved right into the opening, blocking my view. His voice was low when he spoke to Luca. "Get the lights, now." But his voice was different. It was stripped bare. It was horror. Luca ran. Marco turned back to the open container. He raised a hand, palm out. It was a calming gesture, meant for the dark inside. "No one is going to hurt you," he said. His words were clear, slow. "You are safe now." I saw his other hand then. It was clenched into a fist, so tight his short nails were digging white moons into his own palm. All that professional calculation was gone. This was something raw and personal. He backed away as his men came running back with portable lanterns. The light flooded the container's mouth. That's when I saw them. Young women, maybe a dozen or more, huddled together on the cold floor. Their clothes were thin, their faces, The terror there made my stomach turn. This was the agricultural supply. Marco stood staring for a long moment. He looked from the women to his own men. His expression had changed completely. The cold boss was gone. In his place was a man vibrating with a quiet, terrifying rage. He turned to Luca. His voice was a controlled command. "Get them out. Gently, take them to the old office. Get them blankets, water, whatever they need." He paused. "No one sees this. No one knows." Then he looked at me. His eyes held a shattered apology and a promise of violence to come. The phantom press of that shipping container door still vibrated in my hands. I sat in the cafe's back room the next morning. The first week light was catching in the dust above the cold espresso machine. Marco showed up just after I did. His hair was damp from a shower, but his clothes were the same. He leaned against a stainless steel counter, his arms crossed. He looked at my open laptop on the table between us. He did not sit down. "You shouldn't be here," he said. His voice was low and flat. "You said you would be at the safe house," I said. I pointed at the screen. "I found the warehouse address. I found the shipment patterns. I have names." "I know." "Then you know I can't hide. I have to use this." He pushed off from the counter. He took 2 steps forward. The room felt small. He looked at the data on my screen, not at me. "You will go to the safe house. My men will take you now. You will stay there." "No." The word was louder than I meant it to be. "You don't get to order me into a box," I said. "I am not one of your shipments." He finally looked at me. There was a dark hollow under his left eye I hadn't seen before. "This is not a discussion." "It is for me," I said. I stood up. We were close now. The air felt warm and still. "You protect me just to move me," I said. "You tell me things just to control what I do next. I am not your asset." His face changed. The controlled anger drained away. Something else flickered across his features. It was raw, open. He looked down at his own hands. He turned them over, staring at his palms like he didn't recognize them. His shoulders dropped an inch. "You think I want this?" he asked. His voice was different, quiet and rough. "You think I enjoy this fear?" I didn't know what to say. I just watched him. "I lost someone," he said. He didn't look up. "A long time ago. I was not fast enough. I was not smart enough." He stopped. He took a slow breath that shook on the way in. "When Thorne's men came to your door, I saw it happening again. Every order I give is just another way to be wrong." He fell silent. The hum of the cafe's refrigerator filled the room. I could see the pulse in his throat. I could smell the faint scent of soap on his skin. He was a man built for giving commands, now standing broken by one. He hadn't meant to say any of that. I knew it. He knew I knew it. We stood there, not touching. The space between us felt heavy and full. I could have reached out. He could have. Neither of us moved. The raw ache of Marco's grip still lingered in my forearm the next day. A persistent, bruised echo. I stood inside Chloe's apartment doorway, blinking against the sharp morning light cutting across her cluttered floor. My sister slept on the couch under a thin blanket, her red hair a messy bun. I saw my laptop was still open on her kitchen table, the screen glowing with my research. I moved quietly toward it, but my foot caught on the edge of the rug. I looked down. The pattern was wrong. It was shifted a few inches out of place. I never left it like that. I knelt and pulled open the desk drawer beneath the table. It slid open too easily. The files inside were neat, but they were not my kind of neat. The top folder's corner was bent down, a small thing, a thing I would never ever do. My heart started a hard rhythm against my ribs. I was scared, but my mind went very clear and cold. I sat and opened the laptop. My fingers moved fast over the keys. I copied every file, every bank record and shipping manifest onto a small silver drive from my pocket. The sound of the computer fan was loud in the quiet room. I could smell the lemony cleaner Chloe used on the table, but underneath was a faint trace of stale cigarette smoke that didn't belong there. I finished the copy and closed the laptop. I looked toward the window. A dark sedan was parked across the street. It had not been there when I arrived. It was just sitting there, engine off, windows tinted black. I knew I had to leave right then. I peeled the silver drive from the laptop and tucked it deep into the cuff of my sleeve. It felt like a piece of ice against my skin. I took one last look at my sister sleeping on the couch. Her face was smooth and untroubled. I couldn't wake her. Taking her with me would be more dangerous. I had to trust that getting this information out was the only way to protect her for good. I stood up and my knee popped in the quiet apartment. The sound seemed to echo. I walked toward the door, each step feeling too loud on the creaky floorboards. I was 3 steps from the door when I heard a floorboard groan on the other side. The sound was not from my apartment. It came from the hallway. Then I heard the soft scuff of a shoe turning. Someone was right outside. They were not leaving. They were positioning themselves, something locked in my chest. I backed away from the door, moving sideways into the kitchen area. My hand closed around the handle of a knife from the block on the counter. I held it down at my side, the blade cold against my leg. The only sound was the hum of Chloe's old refrigerator. Then a heavy shoulder slammed into the door. The wood around the lock splintered with a sharp crack. My ears still rang with the splintering crack of Chloe's door giving way. The safe house living room felt unnervingly silent, the only sound the hum of a refrigerator from the kitchen down the hall. I found Marco Rossi, the Mafia boss, standing at the sink. He looked at me for a second too long. I didn't know what it meant. I walked into the kitchen and gripped the cold edge of the countertop. "You knew," I said. My voice was flat and hard. He didn't turn around. He picked up a clean glass from the drying rack. He started polishing it with a white towel. He focused on the glass like it was the only thing in the world. "Your men were supposed to be watching her," I said. "They were," he said. His back was still to me. "Then where are they? Where is she?" My hands were steady, which was worse. "They're dead." Marco's voice was low. "Thorne's people got to them first. They were waiting." He finally turned. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He looked at a point over my shoulder. He kept polishing that dry, clean glass. The rhythmic motion of his hand was too careful. "You aren't doing anything," I said. "You're just standing here." "Doing what?" he asked. His hand stopped moving. "Call the police. The officer who would take the report is on Thorne's payroll. The detective who would lead the case vacations at his villa. I would be giving them your sister's name and my own location." His hand slipped then. The glass hit the tile floor and shattered. Pieces skittered across our feet. He stared down at the broken shards. His shoulders dropped. He looked broken. He had a gun on his hip and blood on his hands. He didn't move to clean it up. He just looked at the mess. "The code I lived by," he said slowly. "It was clear. It kept things clean. You see a threat, you remove it. You have an obligation, you fulfill it. But this." He looked at me then, his eyes finally finding mine. "This is a sickness. It's in everything, and my code, it doesn't work here. It doesn't protect you or her." He shook his head once. "I don't know what to do." We stood inches apart in the quiet kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. I could see the faint, quick pulse in his throat. He reached out. His hand stopped in the air between us. His fingers were close to my cheek. He didn't touch me. He let his hand fall back to his side. I didn't move either. I wanted to scream. I wanted to lean into that almost touch. I stayed perfectly still. I thought of Chloe, and my hand didn't move to close the space. The echo of Marco's shattered voice still vibrated in my chest, a physical ache I couldn't exhale. The frigid dock air, thick with the stink of dead fish and diesel, finally bit through the numbness as I stared at Thorne's warehouse. I moved through a maze of stacked containers. My shoes made soft crunching sounds on the gravel and broken glass. I kept my breathing even and my steps quiet. I remembered the pattern from my research. The target was Warehouse 7, a long, low building with rust streaking its corrugated walls. A single yellow bulb glowed above its side door. That was the door the manifests listed for the special shipments. I moved closer, using the shadows of crane machinery for cover. My hands were steady for the first time all night. I had a purpose now. I would get Chloe out. Then I saw it. A shadow moved against the warehouse wall. It was too tall and thin to be part of the structure. It shifted, then went still. My whole body locked. That was a man. He was posted as a lookout. This was not just a holding site. It was guarded. This felt like a trap. I pressed my back against a cold metal container. The taste of salt and oil coated my tongue. I had to think. The side door was watched. I needed another way in. The screech of tires made me jump. I spun around. A black car skidded to a stop way too close. Marco threw his door open before it even settled. He ran straight at me. In the bad dock light, his face looked pale. He waved one arm back toward the car. His other arm was pressed tight against his side. He was hurt. "Elena, no." His shout was raw, like it tore his throat. That's when the side door of the warehouse burst open. Harsh white light flooded the dock, and I saw her. Chloe was inside, tied to a chair. 2 of Thorne's men stood behind her, but it was the other men who made my breath stop. 3 men in police uniforms walked out with Silas Thorne. They were talking, laughing. One of the cops leaned in and accepted a cigarette from Thorne. Marco's warning was true. It was all true. Marco crashed into me then. He tackled me into a narrow gap between two shipping containers. We hit the ground hard. His body covered mine. His hand clamped over my mouth. His chest heaved against my back. He wasn't trying to hurt me. He was trying to save me. He held me there, still and silent, as the patrol of cops and gangsters passed right by our hiding spot. Their footsteps were loud on the gravel. The rest made sense. The trap, the setup, but one thing didn't. One of those cops was wearing Marco's missing watch. The pressure of his hand against my mouth felt like a brand. We crouched inside the warehouse door. The air was cold and smelled like damp concrete and oil. His hand dropped away. He pointed. Deeper in the gloom, a single light shone over a cluster of containers. Two men stood guard there. My chest tightened. That had to be it. Marco leaned close. His breath warmed my ear. "Stay behind me. Move when I move." His voice was a rough scrape. I saw a line of tension in his neck I'd never noticed before. It made him look younger, more tired. Then the look was gone. He was just a shape moving through the dark. I followed. My sneakers were silent on the gritty floor. We used crates and machinery for cover. The guards were talking in low voices. They didn't look our way. Marco stopped behind a forklift. He watched them. Then he gave me a single, sharp nod. He moved. He was fast and quiet. He came up behind the first guard. His arm went around the man's throat. The second guard turned. Marco's other hand came up. There was a quiet thud. The second man fell. The first went limp. Marco lowered him to the ground. He took a key from the first guard's belt. He tossed it to me. It was cold in my hand. "The container on the left," he whispered. "Be quick." I ran to the metal door. My fingers fumbled with the lock. It clicked. I hauled the heavy door open just enough to slip inside. The air was stale. Cold. A small figure was huddled in the corner. Chloe. Her red hair was a dark tangle in the weak light. Her hands were bound behind her back. A strip of cloth gagged her. Her eyes went wide when she saw me. I rushed over and pulled the gag down. "It's me," I whispered. I started working on the plastic ties around her wrists. Before she could speak, a new voice cut through the warehouse air. Smooth. Calm, I knew it from the news. Seal as Thorne. I peeked through the crack in the door. Thorne stood in the pool of light. Silver-haired businessman. Flanked by two of his own men and a police officer. He was looking right at our row of containers. "Start with this one," Thorne said. He pointed to the container right beside ours. "Process everything inside. No loose ends." One of his men stepped forward with a bolt cutter. He began cutting the lock on the next container door. Chloe's breath caught. She understood what that meant. I finally understood why my hand hadn't moved to close the space between Marco and me back at the safe house. It was because a part of me was already standing right here, in the dark with my sister, with no way out. The metallic taste of adrenaline coated my tongue. Sharp. Thorne's shout propelled me backward. I stumbled into a cramped utility closet. My shoulder brushed a damp mop handle slick with grime. The door clicked shut behind Marco. He blocked the sliver of light from under the door with his body. We were trapped in the dark. The sound of fighting was just outside. His breathing was a hard, fast rhythm next to mine. "Your arm," I said. I could see the dark stain spreading on his sleeve. He didn't look at it. He pressed his left hand against the wound. His right hand held his weapon loosely at his side. The fight outside was a mess of shouts and heavy thuds. Chloe was just a few containers away. My need to run to her was a physical pull. But the man in front of me was bleeding, because he followed me here. He turned his head toward me. His eyes were very dark in the shadows. He watched my face. Then he did something I didn't expect. He let out a slow, controlled breath. His shoulders dropped an inch. It wasn't defeat, it was a release. A weight he'd carried for too long. "The old way ends tonight," he said. His voice was low, final. "Whatever happens after, we face it." Then he held his weapon out to me. Grip first. The metal was warm from his hand. This was it, the irreversible choice. Taking it meant accepting a role in his world, in his betrayal of the code he lived by. I stared at his extended hand. I thought of the cop outside wearing his watch. Marco hadn't lost it. He'd given it, a bribe to look the other way tonight. This was the cost of his protection. My hand closed over the grip. It felt heavy and wrong, and like the only choice I had left. He nodded once, a sharp movement. "Cover the door, I'll get your sister." He moved past me, his uninjured arm brushing mine. The contact was brief. It held a current of trust that terrified me more than any threat. He left the closet and I followed. The weapon in my hand was a promise, and a sentence. but my hand had stopped shaking when I took it. I still had no answer for that. The ghost of his trust still pulsed in my palm. I blinked against the sudden sting of cold rain. We were on the loading dock now. My boots splashed through oily puddles that shimmered with emergency lights. A black sedan was already skidding toward the open gate. Thorne, the rival boss, was halfway inside it. Marco was a dark shape sprinting across the slick concrete. One of his own men stepped into his path. Carlo, his voice was tight with protocol. "Boss, the police are coming. We have to fall back now." Marco did not slow down. He shoved Carlo aside with a hard shoulder. The movement opened the wound on his arm again. A fresh bloom of red spread on his sleeve. He kept running. The sedan's engine roared. It was going to make the gate. I raised Marco's weapon. My hands were shaking. I could not see a clear shot. Marco reached the vehicle as it lurched forward. He did not go for the driver. He wrenched open the back passenger door. The car swerved, dragging him for a few terrible steps. Then he hauled himself inside. The vehicle fishtailed and slammed into a stack of pallets. The sound of crunching metal was loud over the rain. I started forward, but Chloe pulled me back behind a forklift. Her fingers were cold and tight on my wrist. "Elena, don't," she whispered. Her face was streaked with rain and tears. Two figures tumbled out of the wrecked sedan onto the wet dock. Marco was on top, pinning Thorne down. Thorne fought like a cornered animal, scratching and kicking. Marco took the hits. He did not hit back. He just held him there, his good arm locked across Thorne's chest. For a second, his head was bowed. It looked like exhaustion, not rage. I did not know what to do with that. Distant sirens split the night. These were different from the first ones. These were coming closer. Blue and red lights flashed at the far end of the industrial park. Real police. Marco looked up then. His eyes found mine across the chaos. He gave a single, sharp nod. Then he stood. He yanked Thorne up with him. He did not throw a final punch. He turned Thorne toward the approaching lights and shoved him forward, hard into the path of the law. Why he didn't throw that punch? That wasn't going away. The cold warehouse rain still clung to my skin. I pressed my back against the safe room's steel door. Marco moved past me. He limped to a bare metal table in the center of the room. His movements were stiff. He pulled a folded paper from inside his torn jacket. He slapped it down on the table. The sound was sharp. "The major shipment," he said. His voice was hollow and tired. He pointed a stiff finger at a line of typed text. "It leaves tomorrow night, from the private docks." I stepped closer to look. The date on the logistics sheet was clear. My hands started to shake. I looked from the paper to his face. "Tomorrow, that's impossible." The words came out thin. I backed away from the table. "We just got Chloe back. The police have Thorne. We need time to plan." Marco did not look at me. He stared at the map next to the sheet. His face was pale under the single overhead bulb. "The police have a corrupt captain. Thorne will post bail by noon. His operation runs on a clock." His tone was flat and factual. It was the voice of a man reading a death sentence. "We don't disrupt it tomorrow. Chloe goes on that shipment." A knot tightened in my stomach. I understood his meaning. "You want to hit the main yard tomorrow night, their most fortified location." My voice dropped to a whisper. "That's a death sentence for anyone who tries." Finally, he looked at me. His eyes were not cold. They were just empty. He had given up on something. "It's the only chance, a direct assault. My men and I will draw their fire at the front gate." He said it like he was listing supplies. I searched his face for any sign of doubt. I found none, just a grim acceptance. I was terrified. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then I thought of Chloe, shoved into a dark container. I thought of the women we had just seen. My hands stopped shaking. The calm that came over me was worse than the fear. "No," I said. The word was solid. "Your men caused the distraction, but I go into the containers. I know the layout from the manifests. I can find her faster than any of your soldiers." I watched him. I saw a muscle in his cheek twitch. It was the only sign of his protest. He was giving me a way to die with my sister. That was his version of kindness. Whatever came next, why his eyes had gone empty when he gave me that order. That was the part I hadn't figured out. The phantom taste of bile still coated the back of my throat. In the safe room's new stillness, my knee pressed against the cold metal leg of the table. The single overhead bulb hummed a low, steady note. Marco stood close. His shoulder brushed mine as he pointed to a loading dock entrance on the faded paper. Someone in his world was always watching. But here, there was only the hum, and our shared breath on the glassy surface. I saw his hand then. It rested flat on the blueprint, right near my own. A fine, rapid tremor moved through his fingers. It was there for just a second. Then he made a fist and pulled his arm back. He cleared his throat and went right back to talking about patrol rotations. I stopped listening. I watched the line of his throat as he swallowed. His voice was steady, but his hand had told a different story. You can't go in there. The words cut his own sentence in half. He looked as surprised as I felt. He rubbed the heel of his hand hard against his forehead, like he was trying to erase a thought. He set it to the floor. The maze of containers, it's a perfect trap. If they seal you in, I can't get to you. His voice was raw, stripped of all its usual command. The space between us felt warm, too small. I didn't move away. He finally lowered his hand and looked at me. His usual mask was gone. His eyes were wide and unguarded. I saw the fear there, plain and deep. It wasn't a fear of Thorn or the police. It was simpler, more terrifying. He was scared for me. The realization was a quiet ache in my chest. He reached out slowly, his fingers stopping just short of touching my wrist on the table. He left that distance unclosed. Everything else I could deal with. But that was different. The phantom grip of his hand on my wrist still tingled against my skin. I stood on the damp, creosote-soaked planks of the private dock. Halogen lamps bleached the night mist into a sickly yellow haze. Silas Thorne's voice, slick and commanding, echoed from somewhere to my right. I pressed my back against the cold metal of a container. My heart hammered against my ribs. The smell of salt water and diesel fuel was thick. I waited. His orders to a guard faded toward the main warehouse. Then I slipped through the gap in the chain-link fence. Gunfire cracked the night at the north gate. Marco's distraction. Shouts erupted. Boots pounded on concrete, running toward the noise. I ran the opposite way. My sneakers made soft slaps on the wet ground. I ducked into the narrow canyon between two towering container stacks. The numbers were stenciled in white paint, hard to read in the shifting shadows. I counted them off in my head. My breath was a ragged cloud in the cold. Container number 7811. The door was heavy, but the locking bar wasn't sealed yet. I put my whole weight into pulling it. The metal groaned open a foot. Chloe blinked up at me from the dark corner inside. My sister was gagged. Her hands were bound behind her. Her red hair was a messy halo around her terrified face. I scrambled in. I cut her bonds with the knife from my pocket. She pulled the gag down and choked out a sob. I wrapped an arm around her and helped her stand. Her whole body shook against mine. I was pulling her toward the sliver of light from the open door when a spotlight swept across the yard. It painted a bright stripe over the opening. Thorne's voice boomed over a loudspeaker, sharp and close. They're in the yard. Find them and seal the gates. I dragged Chloe out and into the deeper maze of shadows. We stumbled behind another container. My lungs burned. Chloe clung to my arm. Then the light found us again. It pinned us against the steel wall. I turned, shielding her with my body. Silas Thorne stood 20 yards away. The polished, silver-haired man held a pistol loose at his side. Two of his guards flanked him, their own guns raised. The path to the fence was completely blocked. Thorne smiled his politician's smile. He took a step forward. Marco's distraction had stopped. The only sound was the hum of the halogens and the distant lap of water. The sudden cold of the dock's night air was a sharp shock against my sweat-dampened skin. Backed against the steel side of the open container, I tasted diesel fumes and my own fear. Silas Thorne stood 30 feet away. His face was a pale oval in the dock lights. He smiled. He raised a hand and pointed right at us. There. His shout was a whip crack in the night. I grabbed Chloe's arm and pulled her back into the container's dark mouth. My sister stumbled against me. Her breathing was fast and shallow against my neck. I scanned the narrow alley between the steel walls. Our planned route was a dead end. Two of Thorne's men appeared at the far end. I looked the other way. Another man blocked that exit too. The trap was shut. Marco moved then. He shoved Chloe and me behind a large metal refuse bin. His back pressed against the cold container wall. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the approaching men. I saw the rapid rise and fall of his chest under his dark shirt. That was the only sign. Go, get her out the other way. His voice was a low, rough command. He pushed his own handgun into my hand. The metal was still warm from his body. I'll hold them here. Use the route you memorized, the one past the refrigeration units. He stepped out into the open space before I could argue. He fired 2 shots into the air. The sound was enormous. It echoed off the steel canyon walls. All the men turned toward him. He was making himself the only target. I felt a terrible, warm ache in my chest. His world had almost killed me once. It would try again. I turned and pulled Chloe deeper into the maze. Gunfire erupted behind us, sharp and quick. I didn't look back, I just ran. My hand was tight around the unfamiliar weapon. Chloe's fingers were locked in mine. We hit a junction between towering containers. I chose the left path. It was darker, leading toward the humming refrigeration units. The sound of fighting grew fainter with every step. We were alone now. The full weight of that pressed down on me. I was responsible for everything. And that question, why he'd fired those shots into the air, sat there like something unfinished. My lungs still ached from the cold, metallic bite of the dockside air. The sub-basement greeted me with the low, constant hum of a climate control system fighting a damp chill. Marco stood over a metal table under a single hanging bulb, studying a map. The light made the sweat on his temple look like glass. He didn't look up when I entered. His finger traced a line on the paper, over and over. The only sound was the hum and our breathing. I saw a muscle in his neck jump. A tiny, quick movement. He finally spoke. His voice was flat. "The transfer dock is here. The container will be here," he pointed. His hand was dirty. A dark smudge of grime streaked across his knuckle. I moved closer to see. That's when I noticed his hand wasn't steady. The tip of his finger trembled just above the paper, a small shake. I would have missed it if I wasn't so close. "Marco?" I asked. My own voice sounded soft in the humming room. I reached out. I covered his hand with mine on the map. His skin was warm. He went very still. He didn't pull away. He looked at our hands, then he looked at me. His eyes were dark and tired. "When I fired those shots," he said. "It was a signal. It told my men to move in. It also told every guard where I was." He let out a short breath. "They swarmed me. That was the point. It gave you your gap." He looked back at the map. "If you get lost in there, Alina, if you vanish into that dark." His voice did something then. It cracked open. "I can't lose you too." He said it like it was a secret he hated. He pulled his hand from under mine. He curled it into a fist against the table. I didn't move back. We were inches apart. I could see the pale line of an old burn on his collarbone. I could feel the heat from his body. He didn't close the distance. He just held himself there, perfectly still. The hum of the system filled the space between us. It filled it with everything we did not say. Then he straightened up. The moment broke. He picked up the map. He folded it with careful, precise movements. He held it out to me. His annotations were in a tight, clear script. Every turn, every hazard, every safe corner. It was a gift. It was a surrender. I put it away and got on with things, but what I'd seen when his voice cracked open refused to stay put. The map's edges had pressed a faint, persistent ache into the center of my palm all through the silent cab ride. Stepping into the penthouse's marble foyer, I was wrapped in the chilled, sterile scent of orchids. I followed Marco into the main suite. The view through the windows showed the city lights glittering like a spilled jewel box. Marco adjusted his cufflinks. He looked like a different man in his tailored suit. The adjoining ballroom was already full of men in expensive suits. Marco moved through them with a smooth smile. I recognized some faces from Chloe's reports. Then Silas Thorne arrived with 6 bodyguards. The older man with silver hair scanned the room with cold eyes. He didn't touch the drink offered to him. He looked like a politician at a fundraiser he despised. Thorne pulled Marco aside near a grand piano. I stood close enough to hear. "This feels like a reunion of my enemies," Thorne said. His voice was low and cold. He gripped Marco's shoulder with a practiced, hard pressure. Marco's smile didn't reach his eyes. He said something about future business. Then Thorne's head guard, a bulky man with a shaved head, stepped forward. He showed Thorne a phone screen. Marco's smile died when he saw it. All the blood left his face. I saw the sudden stillness in his shoulders. The cash, the gun, the scars, none of it was normal, but this was different. Thorne turned the phone toward Marco. The screen showed a grainy security feed, a dock camera view, a figure with my coat and hair moving between containers. Thorne smiled a thin, cruel smile. "You should have stuck to the old rules." His bodyguards closed in around Marco. Marco backed up a step. His hand drifted toward the hidden line of his jacket. I saw the faint tremor in his fingers before he clenched his fist. He looked at me across the room. His eyes held a raw fear I had never seen in them before. He paused too long before he spoke. "She has nothing to do with our business," he said. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. I didn't know what to do with that sound. What Marco had said under his breath when he thought I wasn't listening. I'd been wrong to ignore it this long. The phantom pressure of Marco's warning squeeze still lingered in my palm, a silent alarm I carried with me into the howling dark. I stumbled into the container maze, my next breath filled with the scent of wet rust and diesel, thick enough to taste. The storm wind screamed through the narrow metal passages. It sounded like a living thing. I checked the map he gave me against the container numbers stenciled in peeling paint. My sister was close. I found the right container. One guard stood outside it, a big guy with a shaved head, hunched under an overhang to avoid the worst of the rain. I had no weapon. I had no plan beyond the need in my chest. I picked up a loose piece of pipe from a broken pallet. My hands were steady. I waited until the wind hit a new peak, its scream covering the sound of my steps. I swung the pipe low and hard at the back of his knees. He went down with a heavy grunt. I hit him once more on the head. He went still. I took his keys. I took his radio. I unlocked the container door and pulled it open. The space inside was dark. It smelled of fear and damp metal. Chloe was there in the corner, curled into a ball on the floor. Her red hair was matted against her face. She flinched from the sudden light. "It's me," I said, my voice cracked. She looked up, her face broke. She scrambled toward me and I caught her. Her whole body shook against mine. "I knew you'd come," she whispered into my shoulder. Her small bird tattoo was smudged with dirt. I pulled her to her feet. We had to move. Now, a voice crackled from the guard's fallen radio. A new patrol was checking our section. Our clear path back was gone. I saw a gap between two stacked containers ahead. It led deeper into the maze, away from the exit Marco had marked. It was our only choice. I pulled Chloe toward it. She stumbled but kept up. Her hand in mine was ice cold. I thought of Marco's face when he gave me the map. He had run his thumb over a specific route. His touch was careful, like he was handling something fragile. He said under his breath, "Just come back." He thought I didn't hear. Now I was going the wrong way. The sting of salt water in the scrapes on my knuckles was a sharp reminder. I blinked against the sudden, sterile glare of the penthouse's polished marble floor. My boots left damp prints as I walked in. Marco stood across the vast room. He was flanked by two of Thorne's personal guards. His suit jacket was gone. His white shirt was untucked on one side. I saw a dark, wet patch spreading high on his left sleeve. Silas Thorne faced him with a politician's smile. "You're too late, Rossi," Thorne said. His voice was smooth. He gestured to a wall of dark monitors. "The feed is dead. Your little show is over." One of his guards shifted his weight. I saw the outline of a gun under his suit. Marco did not look at me. He kept his eyes on Thorne. He reached into his pocket with his good arm. He pulled out a small, silver device. He held it up. "The show is just starting," Marco said. He pressed a button. Every screen in the room flickered to life. The live feed showed the dock. It showed the open containers. It showed uniformed officers helping women out. Thorne's smile vanished. His face went slack. "This is streaming to every news desk and honest cop in the city," Marco said. "Your partners are watching, too." I saw the other men in the room, Thorne's associates. They looked at each other. One man stood up from his chair. He started edging toward the door. Thorne let out a strangled sound. It wasn't a shout. It was pure rage. He lunged at Marco, not for a weapon, but for the device in his hand. Marco moved to meet him. They crashed into a glass conference table. It shattered under their weight. The two guards raised their weapons, but they hesitated. They looked at the screens. They looked at the fleeing partners. Marco pinned Thorne to the floor among the broken glass. He did not hit him. He just held him there, his injured arm braced against Thorne's throat. Sirens wailed, loud and close, from the street far below. "Why?" Thorne spat, struggling. "For what for her?" Marco's breath came in ragged pulls. He looked over at me then. His eyes were not cold. They were just tired. He leaned close to Thorne's ear. I could not hear the words, but Thorne stopped fighting. He just stared at the ceiling. Marco looked back at me. He let go of Thorne and stood up. He walked toward me, stepping over the glass. He held out the silver device. His hand was smeared with blood from his arm. "The wrong route on your map," he said, his voice low. I traced it to pull my own men away. I needed Thorne to feel safe here. I could not risk them choosing his side. He hadn't chosen me. Something else had put us here. There was a difference. I took the device from his bloody hand. I did not let go. The rain on the pier felt shockingly cold and clean against my skin. We were 100 yards from the flashing police lights. Chloe was already asleep in the back of a car Marco had called. He stood a few feet away from me, hands in his pockets, watching the distant chaos. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead. He looked younger. I saw his shoulders drop. It was a small thing, a release of a breath he'd been holding for years. He turned his head toward me. His eyes were not the eyes of a man who had just won a war. They were just empty. "What did you say to him?" I asked. My voice was rough. "To make Thorn stop fighting at the end." Marco was quiet for a long time. The rain tapped a steady rhythm on an old metal drum nearby. He looked at the water between the piers instead of at me. "I told him his daughter was safe," he said. His voice was low and flat. "I told him she was in Zurich with a new name, that she would never know what he was." I felt the air leave my lungs. It was an act of mercy he had no reason to give. I just stared at him. He finally met my eyes, and I saw the cost of that choice written there. He took a single step closer. The space between us was just a foot of wet wood and cold air. I could see the rapid pulse in his throat. I could smell the rain on his jacket. He didn't reach for me. He didn't close the distance. He just stood there, letting me see him. "Go be with your sister, Alina," he said. The words were quiet. They weren't a command. They were the only gift he had left to give. I knew then that he would stand there until I turned away. He would let me walk first, so I did. I turned toward the car where Chloe slept. I didn't look back. I felt the weight of that almost moment stretching behind me with every step. But one question kept pulling at me. What was he going to do after I walked away? Real quick, if you were holding your breath for a last-minute confession, you might want to hit subscribe, because what happens next? It changes everything. I got into the back seat next to Chloe. Her little chest rose and fell in a steady, deep sleep. The driver was one of Marco's men, a guy I'd seen around the lounge but never spoken to. He didn't say a word. He just pulled away from the curb. We drove for a few blocks. The rain blurred the city lights into smears of gold and red. My hands were still. My heart wasn't racing anymore. I just felt quiet, and then I knew. I knew what Marco was going to do after I walked away. He was going to stand there in the rain until the car was out of sight. And then he was going to turn and walk back into the life he'd built. The life that was now missing the one person who had ever seen him, really seen him, and hadn't looked away. He was going to be alone. "Stop the car." The words were out of my mouth before I could think. They were calm. They were sure. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am." "Stop the car, please." He pulled over to the side of the empty street. I looked at Chloe, sleeping peacefully. I touched her soft cheek. She was safe. She was warm. She was everything. And I knew I couldn't leave him standing there in the cold. "Take her to my sister's address," I said. "You know the one, just get her there safely." I opened the door before he could argue. The cold rain hit my face again. I started walking back the way we came. My shoes splashed through puddles. My hair was soaked in seconds. I didn't care. I rounded the corner onto the pier, and he was still there. He hadn't moved. He was just a dark silhouette against the gray water, his hands still in his pockets, staring out at nothing. He must have heard my footsteps because his shoulders tensed. He turned slowly. He saw me walking toward him. His eyes, which had been so empty, flickered with something I couldn't name. Shock, confusion, a fragile, impossible hope. I stopped a few feet in front of him. The rain was the only sound. I didn't have a grand speech. I didn't have a plan. I just had the truth. "You don't get to send me away," I said. My voice was steady. "Not after everything. Not after tonight." He just looked at me. The rain ran down his face like tears. "So what happens now?" he asked. His voice was rough. I took that last step forward. I closed the distance. I reached out and took his cold hand in mine. "Now," I said, "we go home." So tell me, when you knew it was over, did you walk away? Or did you turn around? Let me know in the comments. If you want more stories where the quiet choice is the brave one, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.